Whenever business leaders and politicians talk about diversity, you can almost guarantee someone uses the phrase melting pot.
We need to uphold the great tradition of the melting pot.
And the United States is also a great melting pot.
We're not going to be a melting pot.
Because I grew up in Hawaii, a melting pot of races and customs.
Lovely Lady Liberty with her book of recipes and the finest one she's got is the Great American Melting Pot, the Great American Melting Pot.
The idea implies when we're all blended and working together, we're all better off than when we're standing alone. Sometimes they make other food references like gumbo and chopped salads to convey America's appreciation of different colors, cultures, and lifestyles. But in real life, things aren't so simple or delicious.
In the real world, you can be the flavor of the month in February and too spicy for America's palate the next. This can be both confusing and frustrating for people of color and other marginalized communities who are trying to make a living while staying true to themselves. And in recent years, things have begun to boil over.
Who better to weigh in on this than Deepa Purushothaman, author of The First, The Few, The Only, and expert on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's an advocate for women of color, speaker, executive fellow at Harvard Business School, and most importantly, a truth teller. And I want to start with an impossible question to answer, which is I want you to predict the future. It's 2032. And we're looking at one of these recent reports about diversity in America, in corporate America. What do you want that headline to be?
The headline I often talk about is that it's going to take us to 2050 to really see difference, right, in the ways that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to see a headline that says by 2030, right, we're 20 years ahead of where we expected to be. That would make me happy and make me feel good about this work. I'd like to get to a place where we've been through hard times, and I think we're going to get harder on these topics before it gets better. And I'm not okay with that, but I also understand there's like an ebb and a flow and a process to this that I think some people don't think about when they think about this work. And so we're really bringing people into the conversation at this stage of the game. So I think by 2030, I'm hoping everyone's in the conversation. I'm not expecting everyone to be aligned, but we're just beginning the conversation. So I'm hoping we're past the conflict phase, right, where it's as polarizing as it is now, and that we're having helpful conversations, right, especially in the workplace, because I've probably been in 200 to 300 companies in the last 8 months, and some of the conversations, I'm glad that they're doing it, right, and I do it. I say that that's progress sometimes when I talk, but at the same time, some of the conversations are very superficial, and some of the conversations are a lot more meaty and people really want to do the work versus the checkbox. And so I'm hoping by 2030, we're past the checkbox, we're past the what is unconscious bias, right? The 3 questions that we all get, and that we're in a different place in this conversation because this work is hard. I mean, you all know that. It's full of shame and pain and history. And so I'm hoping everyone's in a place where they understand why this work is that way and that we're having more in-depth conversations.
Yeah. There were so many parallels, obviously just in kind of preparing for this conversation between our book and your book, the topics that you were talking about. But even when I think about your TED Talk, and you opened it with some nerve-wracking words like Deepa.
Your job is killing you.
Mm-hmm.
There are parallels there as well because we had very similar experiences and struggles in our 30s. In terms of not being able to cope with the stress and the strain and the rigor of being, road warriors and then transitioning from that to being parents. And we know so many of the people that are in our community that are struggling with that as well. Why did you feel like wellness was such an important topic to cover, not just in your talk, but also in your book?
It's interesting. This morning, someone was asking me that, and I realized I've started to do more and more talks on burnout, right, and the health aspects, even though that's not what the book is about. I'm doing full talks on burnout, which I never expected to do, right? I think it comes from my own story. So my own story of leaving came 21 years after being at Deloitte, being at one company. I had what I call a magical career, right? I rose really quickly, had a lot of impact. And my decision to leave was two reasons. So one was my original calling, which was politics and policy. Like that's what I went to school for. That's what I thought I'd be doing the last, 7-8 years in this country. It made me kind of really ask, like, am I doing my purpose in this world? And how do I get back to some of that, which is very hard when you're in an intense job. There's not room for the things that you used to do when you were younger or that really called you. So really a purpose question. But then the second issue for me was getting sick. So I am, significantly into my career, 16, 17 years. The issues started to mount slowly over time, but over the course of 3 years, they really grew. So they started as small things, right? I'm dismissing them already, but like headaches, which turned into frequent migraines, not sleeping well, stomach pains, adrenal fatigue, like things that, leaky gut, like things that were smaller. And then over the course of 3 years, they really mounted. I spent 8 months in bed. So I could not feel elbows down and knees down. I had been in the TED Talk you're talking about. I've been to 14 doctors. I'm in front of my 15, this is the 14th doctors. I've been to 13 doctors, my 14th doctor. This is maybe the 4th or 5th time I've seen her. She spreads all the reports across the desk and she looks at me and she's giving me the side eye because I have my suitcase with me. She's a doctor I saw in San Diego when I traveled because I lived on a plane, right? So think about that. Like I'm going to medical appointments when I travel. And she's looking at me and she says, we can keep running tests or I can tell you what you already know. I think your job is killing you, which is the line. Yeah. And she literally said that. And she said, what would you do if you didn't do a big job like this? Do you feel like you have to do a big job like this to be worthy? And then the big one, don't you just see you're worthy being you? And I say this in the book, I willed myself not to cry, right? Like not to drop a tear because I felt like she had seen through me. And then I went to my hotel room and cried for like 4 hours straight. It took me 3 more years to kind of get out of that situation, right? To figure out like how could I give up my entire identity that I'd sacrificed so much for, and especially being a first, which I think I've only really come to terms with. Like when you're a first, you hold the seat for a lot of reasons that are beyond yourself and you don't even understand that sense of responsibility. And so, then it was a process of unpacking, like, what is my identity if it's not my work? Who am I? Like, what do I want to do? How do I want to show up? And so that's really where that comes from for me, my own journey. But I would also share, and it sounds similar in your work, like I interviewed 500 women of color. And that is one of the stories. I say this in the book, the most surprising thing. And I have a piece coming out, or I should say, there's a piece in MIT that speaks to this. And it's the first time I've seen it in this language. But I think work environments make us sick. And I call it toxic with an SICK. And I'm excited that they're putting attention in research, numbers and attention around it, because I think it's not a topic we talk about enough. We don't talk about how stress manifests in the body and certain ways of working and being, and this focus on productivity that we have, especially in this country, really damages us. Yes, we're talking about well-being and we've talked a lot about the emotional side, I think, during COVID. We haven't talked enough about the physical side. So the number one most surprising thing was literally 3 out of 5 of the women. I say in the book, I say 2/3 of the women would say that they are sick, and not small symptoms, like literal physical symptoms, everything from heart palpitations to headaches to fertility issues. And I list out the symptoms in the book, but they're real. And I've never seen it talked about that way. So it's a lot of what drives me, because my doctors kept saying it's age. You've turned 40. This is what happens when you're 40. And I'm like, this could be 40. Like this feels like I'm dying, right? And mine was a late stage Lyme diagnosis. So I was really sick. I literally spent 3 years trying to get well. But I'm surprised. Like when I share that story, the number of women of color, all kinds of women of color, coming up to me saying that's my story too. And I've started to expand my work a little bit because I'm hearing that's true of women. Like almost all of the women come up afterwards, the white women too, and will say, that's my story too. Or as a mom, I'm juggling too many things and I've sacrificed my health. There's this idea that success, comes at the cost of our health. And that's part of what I really want my work to be in the future, is to really rewrite that narrative.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Cashing Out the Podcast. To see more videos like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to turn on your notifications. To get your copy of Cashing Out the book, visit Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, or download the audiobook on Audible.